They say you don't truly know a person until they've had the chance to betray you. But maybe the cruelest betrayal is the one that waits quietly, behind laughter, shared meals, and promises made under your roof. The Stoics would call it fate. I called it the day everything I believed in turned to dust. The sound of laughter was what I heard first, not just any laughter. Intimate, hushed, playful. The kind that doesn't belong in your home when you're supposed to be at work. I wasn't meant to be there. A canceled shoot, a surprise early return. Funny how life's little disruptions can reveal that your whole reality is built on sand. I stood in the hallway of our remodeled farmhouse in Vermont, the one I'd spent 3 years restoring, the one my landscape architecture business had finally made possible. The laughter came from upstairs, from our bedroom. Our bedroom. I remember how heavy my tote felt in that moment, how my fingers went numb around the handle as I set it down silently. Something primal in me already knew, something ancient and wounded and wise. The stairs didn't creak, I'd fixed them myself. Last summer, while Daniel was away at a design symposium, the same symposium I now realized Tessa and Lauren had also mysteriously attended. The pieces were already falling into place as I climbed each step, my heart pounding so hard I thought they would hear it before they saw me. I didn't slam the door open. I didn't scream. I simply turned the handle and pushed. There they were, my husband of 8 years and my 2 closest friends since grad school. The 3 of them, tangled in our Belgian linen sheets. The ones Daniel had complained were too expensive when I bought them. The sheets I'd changed just yesterday. Tessa's blonde curls spilled across my pillow. Lauren's signature gold bracelet, the one I'd helped Daniel pick out for her birthday last month, glinted on the nightstand. And Daniel looked at me not with shame but with irritation. The interruption. The inconvenience of being caught. "Nora," he said, as though I'd walked in on him grabbing a snack in the kitchen. "You're home early. 15 years together, 8 years of marriage, 3 miscarriages. He'd held me through 2 rounds of IVF. He'd promised we'd keep trying. The countless nights I'd stayed up helping him prep keynote decks, the family gatherings where I'd defended him from my mother's icy disdain, the mortgage in both our names, the life insurance, the shared dreams. How long my voice didn't shake, that surprised me. Tessa pulled the sheet up to cover herself. Lauren looked away. It was Daniel who answered. "Does it matter?" He reached for his discarded shirt. "It's not what you think anyway." "Not what I think." As if finding your husband in bed with your 2 best friends could be misinterpreted. "It just happened," Lauren finally whispered, her voice small. "It just happened," I repeated. "All 3 of you just happened to fall naked into my bed?" Tessa started crying then. Those perfect tears that never smudged her mascara. "We didn't mean to hurt you, Nora. It just..." "If you say it just happened one more time," I cut her off. "I swear to God." But I didn't finish the threat, because in that moment, looking at them scrambling to cover themselves with my sheets, looking pathetic and small and caught, something clicked inside me. A strange calm washed over me. I had invested everything in these people. Everything. My time, my love, my trust, my future. These were the people who had sat across from me at Sunday brunches, who had held my hand at my mother's funeral, who had promised to always be there. And now they were here, all right, all of them, together, without me. "Nora, babe, let's talk about this." Daniel stood up, pulling on his pants. "You're upset, I get it, but..." "No," I said quietly. "Not now." I turned around and walked back down the stairs. I could hear them calling after me, the frantic rustling as they dressed. But I wasn't running away. I was holding back a storm. Every muscle in my body was rigid, clenched against the tidal wave of rage and grief crashing beneath the surface. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to demand answers. But I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of watching me unravel. Not here. Not yet. I swallowed it all down, rage, sorrow, humiliation, and turned it into steel. I wasn't having a breakdown. I was calculating. I picked up my bag from where I'd left it and walked to the kitchen. I poured myself a glass of water and stared out at the garden I'd planted last spring. The hydrangeas were in full bloom, blue like Daniel had wanted, though I'd preferred white. They came downstairs together, a guilty procession. Daniel in front, the unofficial spokesperson for this little betrayal trio, Tessa and Lauren behind him, holding hands like frightened children. "Nora," We need to talk about this like adults, Daniel said, his business voice, his closing the deal voice. I took another sip of water and set the glass down carefully on the granite countertop. I've given you everything, I said, not to Daniel specifically, but to all three of them. My loyalty, my trust, my home. I looked at my friends, my secrets. Tessa flinched at that. She knew what I meant. She knew what I knew about her. People make mistakes, Lauren offered weakly. I almost laughed. A mistake is forgetting to pay a bill. A mistake is burning dinner. I gestured upstairs. That wasn't a mistake. That was a choice. A series of choices, made over and over again. Daniel stepped closer, his hands up in that placating gesture he used with difficult clients. We can work through this. Couples therapy, maybe? Or... He hesitated. Or what, Daniel? An open marriage? A divorce? What exactly is your solution here? The three of them exchanged glances. They'd discussed this before, I realized. They'd prepared for getting caught. Maybe some time apart would be good, Daniel finally said. I could stay with who, Daniel? With Tessa? With Lauren? Or do you have someone else I don't know about? His face hardened. You're being hysterical. And there it was. The word men have used for centuries to dismiss women's rightful anger. Hysterical, emotional, unreasonable. I nodded slowly. I'm going to leave now, I said calmly. I'm going to walk out that door, and you three can continue whatever it was I interrupted. Nora, Tessa reached for me. I stepped back. Don't touch me, don't call me, don't text me. Where are you going? Daniel asked, suddenly sounding concerned. Not for me, I realized, but for himself, for what I might do or say. I gave him a smile then, the kind that doesn't reach your eyes. That's no longer your business, is it? As I walked to the door, bag in hand, Daniel called after me. Don't do anything stupid, Nora. Remember, half of everything here is mine. I paused at the door and turned back. You're right, Daniel. Half of everything is yours. I looked at all three of them standing there, including the consequences. Then I walked out, closing the door quietly behind me, not with a bang, but with the soft click of someone who would return when they least expected it. The first week was a blur of hotel rooms and unanswered calls. Daniel tried reaching me 67 times. Tessa, 42. Lauren, 29. I counted each notification as it appeared on my screen, each one a small marker of panic setting in on their end. What they didn't know was that I wasn't falling apart. I wasn't crying myself to sleep in anonymous hotel rooms or drinking myself into oblivion at airport bars. I was thinking, planning, remembering, but there were moments, raw, hollow moments, when I nearly broke. When the silence became deafening and the weight of betrayal settled like stone in my chest. One night in a dim hotel room lit only by the blinking city lights beyond the window, my fingers hovered over my phone screen. A message to Daniel half-typed. Not out of forgiveness, not even for answers. Just to not feel so utterly alone. But I stopped myself. I let the screen fade to black, knowing that reaching out wouldn't give me comfort. It would only reopen wounds I'd barely begun to close. I remembered the night 3 years ago when Daniel had insisted I change my life insurance policy to list him as the sole beneficiary. It just makes sense financially, he'd said. Besides, we're going to grow old together anyway. I remembered how Tessa had borrowed $75,000 from me to keep her yoga studio afloat after her divorce, money I'd inherited from my father, with a promise to pay me back as soon as business picked up. The business had picked up. The money had never come back. I remembered how Lauren had slowly infiltrated my client list, somehow always available when one of my high-profile landscaping clients needed emergency work and I was unavailable. How she'd started dressing like me, talking like me, even adopting my signature design elements. There had been signs everywhere, little betrayals leading to the big one. On day 9, I checked into a small bed and breakfast on the outskirts of Burlington, using cash and a prepaid card. I needed distance, perspective. The elderly owner, Agnes, took one look at me and knew something was wrong. Broken heart or broken trust? She asked as she served me tea that first evening. Is there a difference? I replied. She nodded wisely. Broken heart heals, broken trust transforms. That night I cried for the first time. Not for Daniel or my so-called friends, but for the woman I had been. Trusting, loyal, blind. I allowed myself exactly one night of grief. In the morning I began making calls. First to my uncle's old law firm where his former partner Alan still practiced. Then to the private investigator he'd once recommended, a woman named Diane, with a voice like gravel and a mind like a steel trap. Next to my bank, where I initiated a series of careful legal moves to protect what was mine. Meanwhile, the texts from Daniel evolved, from concern to anger to threats. "Nora, please come home so we can talk. This silent treatment is childish. Nora, if you don't come home, I'll assume you've abandoned the marriage. I'm talking to lawyers. Nora, don't make this uglier than it needs to be." I didn't respond to any of them. Let him think I was falling apart. Let him think I was the weak one. Tessa's messages were different, tearful voice notes about how it just happened, and how it didn't mean anything, and how we'd been friends for too long to throw it all away. As if friendship was something she'd considered while sleeping with my husband. Lauren was more direct. "We need to talk business, Nora. Clients are asking questions. Not about my marriage, not about her betrayal, about business, about money." 2 weeks after I left, I learned from Diane that they had settled into a routine. Daniel staying at our house, Tessa coming over most evenings, Lauren joining them on weekends. They were playing house in my home, spending my money, drinking my wine, sleeping in my bed. "They've been making calls to your clients," Diane told me over a secure line, "telling them you've had a personal crisis and might not be reliable for ongoing projects." Of course they were. They were trying to dismantle my life piece by piece. What they hadn't counted on was that I'd been keeping receipts, literal and figurative. I had the emails where Daniel had transferred funds from our joint account to his private one, just to keep things organized, he'd said. I had the text messages where Tessa had admitted using my original garden concepts for her studio renovations, without crediting me. I had the recordings of Lauren telling clients she was practically partners with me, when she was nothing more than an occasional subcontractor. But most importantly, I had the hidden document I'd discovered 6 months ago while searching for our tax returns. The document Daniel thought was safely locked away in his private safe. The one detailing the shell company he'd created to hide assets from a previous relationship. The one that now held substantial funds. He thought I knew nothing about it. I'd photographed it, resealed it, and put it back exactly as I'd found it. At the time, I hadn't known what to do with that information. I'd been too loyal, too trusting, too blind. I'd told myself there must be a reasonable explanation. Now I knew better. On day 17, I received a formal letter from a law firm representing Daniel. It stated that due to my abandonment of the marital home and refusal to engage in reconciliation attempts, he would be filing for divorce on grounds of abandonment and seeking majority ownership of our joint assets, including my business, which he claimed to have substantially contributed to. I read the letter 3 times, sitting at Agnes's kitchen table. Then I started laughing. I laughed until tears streamed down my face, until Agnes came in looking concerned. "Bad news?" she asked. I wiped my eyes. "No," I said, "just the confirmation I needed." That night, I got a text from an unknown number. It was a photo. Daniel, Tessa, and Lauren at our favorite restaurant, champagne glasses raised in a toast. No message accompanied it. It didn't need one. The meaning was clear. I stared at that photo for a long moment, something tightening in my chest. Not just rage, but grief, a raw ache for the illusion I'd lived in for years. They weren't just celebrating their freedom, they were mocking my pain, toasting my erasure. And yet, beneath the burn, I felt something colder taking root, a fierce resolve that no toast, no photograph could shake. I saved the photo. Evidence of their celebration would make their fall all the sweeter. They thought I was broken. They thought I was hiding, licking my wounds, falling apart without my husband and my friends, the supposed pillars of my life. They thought I was the same, trusting, loyal Nora they'd taken advantage of for years. But that Nora died the moment I opened our bedroom door. The woman who replaced her was someone they wouldn't recognize until it was too late. I gave everything to them, I whispered to myself that night, staring at their smiling faces on my phone screen. And they discarded me like I was nothing. Their mistake wasn't underestimating my love. It was underestimating my intelligence. Day 23 marked my return to the city, not to our home, but to a service department in a building owned by one of my most loyal clients. Alan Mercer had been my first major client when I launched my landscape design business. I'd transformed his cold, rigid penthouse into a sanctuary after his wife passed away. Now he was returning the favor. "Stay as long as you need," he told me, handing over the keys. "And for what it's worth, I've told Daniel and that blonde friend of yours that I'm not interested in working with anyone but you." I hugged him gratefully. "Have they been contacting all my clients?" Alan snorted. "Trying, not succeeding, with the ones who matter." That was something at least. But I knew my business wasn't their real target. It was everything else. The house, the investments, our image in the social circles Daniel so carefully cultivated. He'd always cared deeply about appearances. I settled into the apartment and opened my laptop for the first time since I left. Hundreds of emails waited, but I ignored them for now. Instead, I opened a secure messaging app and contacted Diane. "I'm back. Ready for the next phase." Her reply came quickly. "Good. I have everything you asked for. Meeting tomorrow." We met at a quiet cafe, 3 neighborhoods away from my usual haunts. Diane looked exactly as I'd imagined from our phone calls. Sharp eyes, silver-streaked hair pulled back into a no-nonsense ponytail, dressed in clothes chosen for utility, not style. She slid a USB drive across the table. "Everything's there. Financial records, texts, emails, photos, plus the surveillance you requested." She took a sip of her black coffee. "Your husband's not as clever as he thinks he is." "None of them are," I replied, pocketing the drive. Diane nodded. "The paper trail for the shell company is particularly interesting. Goes back further than you thought, before your marriage. And there's a connection to Tessa's studio I don't think you were aware of." But I wasn't surprised either. "He's been funding her," I said. "Among other things, that studio's been hemorrhaging money for years. It's a front." "For what?" Diane's expression turned grim. "Money laundering, primarily small scale, but definitely illegal. There's also a connection to some property developments that weren't properly permitted, environmental corners cut, safety regulations ignored." I thought about the time Daniel had proudly invested in a friend's development deal. How pleased he'd been with the quick return. How he'd brushed off my questions about the details. "Is Lauren involved too?" Diane nodded. "She's been the connection to some of the contractors." That night, after our meeting, I returned to the apartment and stood in front of the mirror, one hand resting on my stomach. I could feel the warmth of new life growing inside me, a quiet, steady reminder of what truly mattered. I whispered softly to the child I hadn't yet told anyone about, "We're going to be okay, I promise." A strange calm settled over me, not just determination, but hope. Hope rooted in something deeper than revenge. Hope for something new. Her design consultancy gave them legitimacy. The pieces were falling into place, not just my personal betrayal, but a larger pattern of deception. "What about the other matter?" I asked quietly. Diane's eyes softened slightly. "Your medical records were accessed multiple times by someone using Daniel's login to the health portal. Most recently, about 6 months ago, right after my last procedure." My hand instinctively went to my stomach. After 3 miscarriages and 2 failed IVF attempts, the doctors had finally identified the issue, a treatable condition that had been affecting my ability to carry to term. The treatment had worked. I was finally able to conceive. Naturally. I had planned to tell Daniel the night I found him with my friends. "So he knew," I whispered. "Appears so," Diane confirmed. "And there's more. Tessa has been getting prescription prenatal vitamins since around the same time." The cafe suddenly felt too small, too hot. My breath caught. The betrayal, which had already burned so deeply, suddenly plunged sharper and colder. He had known I was pregnant, or at least suspected, and instead of coming to me, instead of even pretending to care, he had chosen someone else. He had chosen her. My fingers curled around the edge of the table, nails pressing into the wood as the nausea of disgust, grief, and fury rose up. It wasn't just betrayal, it was theft. They had tried to take everything, my family, my future, my child's place. And somewhere beneath the fury, a cruel whisper surfaced. Maybe I hadn't been enough. Maybe the miscarriages, the tears, the constant weight of loss had made me too broken, too difficult to love. Maybe Tessa, with her laughter, her ease, her uncomplicated body, was simply the better choice. The thought gutted me more than I expected, because it wasn't just betrayal. It was replacement. They'd been planning this. All of it. Diane didn't offer empty reassurances or sympathy. She simply nodded. People rarely improvise betrayal this complex. It's almost always premeditated. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Thank you for being thorough. It's my job, she replied. But there was compassion in her eyes. What you do with this information is yours. What I did next was methodical, calculated. First, I contacted Frank at my uncle's old law firm and shared what Diane had discovered. His reaction was professional, but tinged with the personal. He'd known me since I was a child, had watched me grow up, had attended my wedding. I'll prepare everything, he assured me. But Nora, are you sure about this approach? It's comprehensive. They left me no choice, I replied. Next, I reached out to specific clients, not to beg for their business, but to share carefully selected pieces of information about Daniel and Lauren's behind-the-scenes manipulations. Not enough to seem vindictive, just enough to plant seeds of doubt. Then I made an appointment with my doctor to confirm what I already knew. The test was positive. I was 8 weeks pregnant. Despite everything, a small flame of joy flickered within me. This child would be mine. Mine alone. While the world thought I was hiding or breaking down, I was building my case piece by piece. I transferred funds from accounts Daniel didn't know about, legitimate savings I'd kept separate. Not out of distrust, initially, but out of habit. A lesson my father had instilled in me. Always have your own money, Nora girl, he'd said. Not because you don't trust, but because you must trust yourself first. I documented everything, from the shell company, creating backups of backups. I restored deleted texts from cloud archives Daniel had forgotten existed. I gathered witnesses, contractors who'd been stiffed, employees from Tessa's studio who'd been paid in cash under the table, clients who'd been approached by Lauren with false claims of partnership. All the while, Daniel's legal threats escalated. The formal letter became legal papers, divorce proceedings citing my erratic behavior and abandonment. Daniel was demanding not just the house, but part ownership of my business, claiming he'd been an essential advisor from the beginning. What he didn't know was that I'd already engaged not just Frank, but 2 other attorneys, each specializing in different aspects of what was coming. One for the divorce, one for business protection, and one for the criminal implications of what Diane had uncovered. On day 37, I received another text from the unknown number. Another photo of the 3 of them, this time in our living room. Papers spread across the coffee table, looking serious, determined, planning their victory. I saved this photo too. Another piece of evidence, another nail in their coffin. That night, I sat in Alan's apartment, looking out at the city lights, one hand resting on my still flat stomach. They think I'm running, I told my unborn child, but I've never been more still, more focused, more certain. I'd spent weeks gathering ammunition, building fortifications, preparing for war. Now it was time to strike, not in anger, not in haste, but with the cold precision of someone who had nothing left to lose, because they thought I'd already lost everything. The truth was, I had never been more powerful than I was in that moment, standing on the edge of destroying the people who had tried to destroy me. I'm ready, I whispered, to myself, to my child, to the universe that had brought me here. Tomorrow, the first domino would fall. Day 45 dawned clear and crisp, a perfect autumn morning for what I'd come to think of as Judgment Day. I dressed carefully in a cream-colored suit I'd never worn before. Nothing Daniel had seen, nothing associated with my old life. My hair was different too, cut in a sleek bob that framed my face more sharply than before. Small changes, but symbolic ones. The woman walking into battle wasn't the same one who had fled the battlefield. My first stop was the offices of Mercer Holdings, Alan's company, where Daniel was scheduled to pitch a new investment opportunity to the board. An opportunity based largely on the illegal developments Diane had uncovered. I hadn't told Alan everything, just enough. He'd arranged for me to have 5 minutes at the beginning of the meeting to discuss a design matter related to the proposal. Daniel wouldn't know I was coming. The boardroom fell silent when I walked in, 12 people seated around a massive table, with Daniel standing at the head, presentation materials ready. His face, when he saw me, was a study in rapidly cycling emotions: shock, anger, fear, and finally, a forced smile. "Nora," he said, recovering quickly. "This is unexpected." "Is it?" I replied, my voice steady. I nodded to Alan, who gestured for me to take the floor. Mr. Mercer has given me a few minutes to address something relevant to today's presentation, I said to the room. I'll be brief. Daniel's smile tightened. Nora, this really isn't the place for personal matters. Oh, but this is business, Daniel. Very much business. I connected my tablet to the display system. I believe you're here to propose an investment in the Westwood Ridge development project? The board members nodded, looking confused but interested. Before you consider that investment, you should know that Westwood Ridge has been under federal investigation for the past 3 months for multiple violations of building codes, environmental regulations, and tax laws. Daniel's face drained of color. That's absurd. I would know if. Would you? I pulled up the first document, an official notification from the Environmental Protection Agency. This was served 2 weeks ago. And this, I swiped to the next document, is the Labor Department's findings on wage theft at 3 Westwood Ridge sites. One of the board members leaned forward. Is this verified? Fully, I replied, sending the files to everyone in the room, along with documentation showing that my husband has been receiving kickbacks from Westwood Ridge for directing investments their way, investments like the one he's proposing today. Daniel was sputtering now, looking from me to the board and back. This is a personal vendetta. My wife and I are going through a divorce. Yes, we are, I agreed calmly. But that has nothing to do with these documents, which have already been provided to the relevant authorities. I'm simply making sure Mercer Holdings doesn't get caught in the crossfire. Alan stood then. I think we'll need to postpone this presentation pending verification of these claims. Daniel, perhaps you should take some time to address these issues. It wasn't a suggestion. Daniel's eyes locked with mine, hatred blazing. You have no idea what you've done, he hissed as he gathered his materials. Actually, I do, I replied quietly. This is just the beginning. My next stop was Tessa's studio, where I arrived just as the lunchtime crowd was picking up. She saw me through the front window and froze, a dress half hung on a rack. I walked in, the bell above the door announcing my arrival to everyone in the shop. Nora, she said, her voice high and tight. I've been trying to reach you. I know. I smiled at the customers browsing the racks. Sorry to interrupt, but I need a quick word with the owner. Business matter. Tessa reluctantly led me to the back office, the one I'd helped her design, with the custom desk I'd found at an estate sale and refinished myself. Look, Nora, about what happened. Let me stop you right there, I interrupted. I'm not here about the fact that you slept with my husband. I'm here about the $75,000 you borrowed from me. She blinked rapidly. I told you, business has been tight. I'll pay you back when. Business hasn't been tight though, has it? Not according to your tax returns. I placed a folder on her desk. You've been showing losses on paper while putting cash through that register that never gets reported. Daniel's been helping you launder money through this place for years. Her face went white. You can't prove that. Actually, I can, I smiled. Your former assistant, Trina, was very helpful once I explained what might happen if she was implicated. I opened the folder to show Tessa Trina's sworn statement. She kept her own records. Smart girl. Tessa collapsed into her chair. What do you want? The $75,000 plus 5% interest transferred to this account by end of business today. I handed her the details. And your resignation from the Westvale Women's Outreach Board. I believe they'd find your recent activities inconsistent with their mission. Tessa was a founder of the charity. Her position there was a key part of her carefully curated public image. You're destroying my life, she whispered. No, I corrected her. I'm simply returning the favor. You 3 tried to do me in. The difference is, I'm doing it legally. I stood to leave. Oh, and Tessa, I've already spoken to the building owner. He's very interested in the cash-only sublease you've been running from the back storage room. I left her sitting there, staring at the folder that contained enough evidence to ruin her. My final stop of the day was the most satisfying, a meeting with Lauren and her biggest client, the Parkers, at their home. They were planning a full outdoor and indoor renovation, a project worth over $500,000. Lauren's face when I walked into the Parkers' living room was priceless, pure panic, barely concealed beneath her professional smile. Nora, I I didn't know you were joining us today, she said, her voice strained. Mrs. Taylor insisted, Mrs. Parker explained, looking confused. She said there was something important about the project she needed to address in person. Indeed, there is, I confirmed, sitting down across from them. Mrs. Parker, you hired Lauren under the impression that she and I were business partners, correct? Mrs. Parker nodded. Yes. She said you were expanding together and that you'd be consulting on our project remotely. I smiled apologetically. I'm afraid that's not accurate. Lauren has never been my partner. She's occasionally worked as a subcontractor on my projects, but we have no business relationship whatsoever. Lauren jumped in quickly. It was a miscommunication. I meant to say we collaborate frequently. Actually, I continued, pulling out copies of emails and project documentation, you specifically told the Parkers that you and I had formed a new partnership called Verde Interiors, which doesn't exist. You also showed them a portfolio that includes at least 15 of my projects that you had no involvement with. As I spoke, I kept my tone measured, but my chest was tight with the effort it took to stay composed. This was the woman who had sat at my table, toasted my birthdays, shared my clients, and now lied with ease. The betrayal still throbbed, but I refused to let it shake my voice. My hand stayed steady as I handed over the documents, but inside, every nerve was burning with clarity. Mrs. Parker turned to Lauren, her expression hardening. Is this true? Lauren stammered, searching for a way out. It's complicated. Nora and I had discussed. We never discussed anything of the sort, I said firmly. And I've brought documentation of all my projects, including who actually worked on them. I handed the portfolio to Mrs. Parker. I'm telling you this not out of spite, but because you deserve honest service for your investment. Mrs. Parker was already leafing through the portfolio, her husband looking over her shoulder with a deepening frown. I think you should leave, Lauren, Mr. Parker finally said. We'll be reviewing our contract with our attorney. Lauren gathered her things in silence, her eyes shooting daggers at me. I added one final twist of the knife. By the way, Lauren, I've taken the liberty of informing the Design Association about your portfolio misrepresentations. They're reviewing your membership status. For someone who lived and died by her professional connections, it was a devastating blow. After Lauren stormed out, I spent another hour with the Parkers, honestly discussing their renovation needs and recommending 3 reputable designers who weren't me. I had no interest in taking over Lauren's project. This wasn't about stealing her work, it was about truth. By evening, my phone was exploding with messages, frantic texts from Daniel, tearful voicemails from Tessa, threatening emails from Lauren. I read or listened to each one, saving them all as further evidence of their character. Daniel's messages were the most telling. You think you've won? This is just getting started. Remember whose name is on the house deed? What he didn't know was that I'd already spoken to the bank that morning. The mortgage payment from our joint account, the one he'd been systematically draining, had bounced. The payment I'd made from my separate account had been accepted, along with documentation showing my consistent contributions, while his had become sporadic. As I returned to my temporary apartment that evening, I received a call from Frank. It's done, he said. The federal investigators moved faster than expected once they had your documentation. There's a freeze on all assets connected to Westwood Ridge, including Daniel's personal accounts and the shell company. I sat down slowly on the edge of the bed. And the house? Safe, for now. Your separate payment history and the evidence of his financial misconduct give us strong leverage. Plus, there's the matter of habitation. You may have left, but you can prove it was under duress. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. What about Tessa and Lauren? The studio's being looked at as part of the larger investigation. As for Lauren, that's more professional than legal, but the misrepresentation could have licensing implications. Thank you, Frank, I said quietly. Nora, he hesitated. Your father would be proud, not of the circumstances, but of how you've handled them, with integrity. After we hung up, I stood by the window, watching the city lights come on as dusk settled. And for a brief, flickering moment, I felt something unexpected. Petty. Not enough to change anything, but enough to remember that Daniel had once been the man I trusted with everything. Seeing him fall wasn't just justice, it was also a quiet, distant kind of grief for what could have been, if only he'd chosen differently. Then the feeling passed, replaced by a steadier calm. For the first time in weeks, I felt something like peace. They had tried to dismantle my life piece by piece, assuming I would shatter along with it. Instead, I had rebuilt myself into something stronger, sharper, more resilient. The woman who had walked in on her husband and friends 6 weeks ago would have begged for explanations, blamed herself, tried to fix what was broken. The woman I had become knew better. Some things aren't meant to be fixed. Some betrayals run too deep. Some people don't deserve second chances. My phone pinged with a text from the same unknown number that had been sending me the photos. This time, it was a single line of text. "You've made your point. Now let's negotiate." I smiled to myself, remembering Agnes's words from the B&B. Broken trust transforms. How right she had been. 1 year later, I stood in the garden of my home. Alone. Now, watching the autumn leaves drift onto the newly installed koi pond, I took a slow breath. The hydrangeas were pink this year, just as I'd always wanted. The divorce had been finalized 6 months ago, with terms that would have been unimaginable had Daniel not been facing federal charges for his role in the Westwood Ridge development scandal. He'd lost his license to practice finance, most of his assets were frozen pending further investigation, and his reputation in our circles was in ruins. I'd kept the house, my business, and walked away from any claim on his remaining assets. I wanted nothing tainted by his deception. In exchange, he'd signed a non-disclosure agreement about our marriage and relinquished any claim to my future earnings. Tessa's studio had closed. The financial irregularities were too extensive to explain away. Once the charity board discovered her involvement in Daniel's schemes, her social standing collapsed. Last I heard, she'd moved to Arizona to live with her sister. Lauren had faced fewer legal consequences, but the professional fallout was severe. The Design Association had revoked her certification after confirming multiple instances of portfolio fraud. She tried to rebuild in another city, but our industry was too small. Word traveled too fast. None of them knew about the baby. My daughter, Sophia, was now 4 months old. A calm, observant little girl with my eyes and a quiet determination all her own. She was napping inside while I took a rare moment for myself in the garden. My phone buzzed. A text from Alan Mercer. Contract approved. Mercer Holdings wants you to handle all 5 properties. Your vision for the reception area sealed the deal. I smiled. My design business had not only survived, but thrived in the aftermath of the scandal. Clients respected how I'd handled the situation, my professionalism, even as my personal life imploded publicly. I'd gained a reputation for integrity that brought more high-profile projects than I could manage. I'd hired 2 junior designers and an operations manager to help carry the load, allowing me to balance motherhood with my career. My home office had been remodeled to accommodate both work and a playpen where Sophia could stay close while I reviewed designs. The doorbell rang, pulling me from my thoughts. I walked through the house, redecorated now, every trace of my previous life erased, and opened the door to find Agnes from the bed and breakfast standing there with a small potted plant. "Thought I'd stop by while I was in the city," she said, holding out the plant. Peace lily. Seemed appropriate. I hugged her, genuinely happy to see the woman who had offered me shelter during my darkest days. "Come in, please. Coffee?" As we sat in my kitchen, redesigned with soft grays and blues, nothing like the stark white Daniel had insisted on, Agnes looked around approvingly. "You've made it yours again," she observed. "It took time," I admitted. "Some spaces held memories I needed to exercise." Agnes nodded toward the baby monitor on the counter. "And the little one? She's well?" "Perfect," I said, unable to hide the pride in my voice. "Would you like to see her when she wakes up?" "I'd be honored," Agnes replied. She sipped her coffee, then asked the question I knew was coming. "Have you heard from any of them?" I shook my head. "The legal agreements prevent direct contact. I hear things, of course, people talk." "And are you satisfied?" Agnes asked gently, choosing her words carefully. "With how it all turned out?" I considered that. Was I satisfied? Was revenge as sweet as they said? "It wasn't about satisfaction," I finally answered. "It was about justice, about consequences, about making sure they couldn't do to someone else what they tried to do to me." Agnes studied me. And healing, has there been that too? I smiled, thinking of Sophia, of my thriving business, of the new friends I'd made, genuine ones this time, with no hidden motives or agendas. Yes, I said, different than I expected, but real. After Agnes left, I checked on Sophia, still sleeping peacefully in her crib. I stood there for a moment, watching her tiny chest rise and fall, overwhelmed, as always, by the fierce love I felt for this child who had come into my life at exactly the right moment. Later that evening, as dusk settled over the garden, I received a text from a number I didn't recognize. My heart skipped a beat. Was it the anonymous texter from before? But this was different. It was from Lauren's former assistant, Mia. Saw Jay today in Chicago. She's telling people you two are still close friends and that you're godmother to her new baby. Thought you should know. The lies continued. I read the message twice, feeling a brief flicker of the old anger. Then came a deeper, quieter feeling. Fatigue. Not just with Lauren or her games, but with the entire cycle of deception that never seemed to end. I'd fought so hard to escape their orbit, only to be pulled back, over and over, by the same untruths. A part of me wanted to scream, to lash out. But another part, older, steadier, chose peace instead. Then, surprisingly, I laughed. Let Lauren lie. Let her pretend. Her fabricated reality couldn't touch my actual one. I typed back, thanks for letting me know. Hope you're well in your new position. Then I deleted the thread. Some might say I'd been ruthless in my response to their betrayal. Perhaps I had been. But I'd been legal, ethical, and truthful, which was more than any of them could claim. The woman who had stood in that bedroom doorway a year ago, seeing her husband entwined with her two closest friends, had been shattered for a moment. But only for a moment. From those shards, I'd built something stronger. A life entirely my own, answerable to no one's expectations but mine. A business that reflected my true vision. A home that sheltered only love and honesty. A future for my daughter, free from the toxic patterns that had nearly destroyed me. As I picked up Sophia for her evening feeding, cradling her close as she blinked up at me with complete trust, I whispered the truth I wanted her to carry through life. Sometimes, little one, the greatest gift people can give you is showing you exactly who they are, and the greatest power you have is believing them. The betrayal hadn't defined me, my response to it had. And that response hadn't just been revenge, it had been rebirth. And for the first time in my life, I felt entirely, irrevocably alive. Not because I'd burned something down, but because I had built something new in its place. A foundation of my own making, one no one else could take away. Dear friend, sometimes the worst pain doesn't come from being betrayed. It comes from realizing you saw it coming and chose to believe in someone anyway. But maybe that's not weakness. Maybe that's grace. The Stoics teach us that we cannot control what others do, but we can control how we respond. We can choose not to become bitter, not to become like those who hurt us. We can choose to rise. So if you've ever felt broken by someone's actions, I hope you remember, what shatters can also be rebuilt, strong, wiser, unshakable. Just like Nora, you are allowed to protect your peace, walk away, and build something no one can ever take from you. You are the architect of your own freedom. If this story moved you, take a moment to like, share it with someone who needs strength today, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that heal, empower, and inspire. We rise together.